Welcome to the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast, where timeless biblical truths meet modern leadership. We are thrilled to have you join us on this journey of exploring how biblical principles can guide us in leading with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Whether you're leading in the church, your workplace, or your community, this podcast is designed to inspire, challenge, and equip you for the road ahead. Let's dive into today's conversation and discover how Scripture shapes the way we lead.
Welcome back to Biblical Perspectives for Leadership.
Great to be back.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into some really potent material. It's a story titled Burying the Past, Investing in the Future. And our goal, our mission really, is to pull out the key insights here about, well, honoring our past, but also about faith and action and stepping into what's next.
And we're using Abraham's story in Genesis chapter 23 as the framework.
Exactly. We'll look at how he handled a huge loss, but then made these really decisive forward-looking moves, lots of leadership lessons, and just, life lessons in there for all of us.
Yeah, what's powerful about this story and how the material presents it is that it feels like a guide for navigating those big transitions, loss, change.
Right. It's not just ancient history. It's like a template.
It really is. For leaders, for anyone figuring out how to process endings and, find the courage for new beginnings, the material really asks, how do you move on when something significant is gone?
That's a perfect setup.
Yeah.
So let's dig into the material, starting with Abraham facing that loss.
Okay.
The story kicks off with Sarah's death. She was 127 years old. We find this right at the start of Genesis chapter 23, verse 1 and verse 2.
And there's a fascinating detail the material points out here. Sarah is apparently the only woman in the entire Bible whose specific age at death and her burial are explicitly noted.
Wow, really? The only one?
Seems so. And the source suggests this was done deliberately to honor her, as this matriarch figure. It really highlights her importance.
That is remarkable. So how does Abraham react? The text says simply, he mourned and wept for her.
And the material gives us a definition of mourning, describing it as that essential period of grief after losing someone vital. Could be death, could be separation.
And it makes a key point, doesn't it? That recovery takes time. It's not instant. It could be months, even years.
Absolutely. Which leads to this idea from the material. Mourning is necessary, you have to go through it, but you can't stay there forever.
Right. There's a time to move forward.
Exactly. And the source defines grief itself as, natural, very personal and complex. It mentions those stages we often hear about: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, but stresses that it's, different for everyone.
Not a neat checklist.
Not at all. And loss, losing a loved one specifically, is that experience of being deprived of them. The material talks about the emotional, psychological impact, how it affects your daily life, your well-being, and that's what triggers the grief process.
So the material then gives some practical guidance on handling loss, which seems really valuable for anyone facing endings.
Yeah, it does. It starts with just acknowledging the loss, naming it, whether it's a big loss or maybe one of those smaller life deaths like a dream ending or an era passing.
Okay, acknowledging it first, then what?
Then allowing yourself to actually grieve, to feel the emotions, not bottle them up.
And understanding it is a process with those potential stages. And crucially, taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually.
Yes, self-care is vital, and seeking support from others, that's highlighted too. Don't go it alone.
Makes sense.
For Christians, the material suggests finding comfort and hope and faith in biblical promises about, death and what comes after.
And learning acceptance for what can't be changed, seeking guidance.
Right, and then working towards recovery by adjusting to the new reality, reinvesting in life again.
And finally, reflecting on it all. Learning and growing from the experience.
So if we bring this back to you, the listener, thinking about leadership or just your own life, the big takeaway from the material here is, yes, there are seasons where you must acknowledge loss, old strategies, failed projects, relationships.
Things that didn't work out.
Exactly. But real leadership, even self-leadership, requires knowing when that season of mourning needs to shift, when it's time to look ahead.
There's that scripture connection the material makes. Philippians chapter 3, verse 13.
Yes, Philippians chapter 3, verse 13, it speaks right to this.
Forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. It's that balance. Honor the past, learn, but don't let it trap you.
Perfectly put. And that idea of straining forward leads us right into the next part of the story and the material's focus. Abraham moving from mourning into action.
Okay, so the situation is Abraham needs a place to bury Sarah. It's an immediate practical need.
Right, but here's the twist. God promised him all this land, but at this point, decades later, he doesn't legally own any of it. He's still technically a foreigner there.
No legal claim, so what's his move?
Well, the story in Genesis chapter 23, verse 3 through verse 16, it details his action.
Genesis chapter 23, verse 3 through verse 16.
He goes to the local people, the Hittites, and he starts a negotiation. He wants to buy a specific burial site, the Cave of Machpelah.
And the material really zooms in on how he buys it, right?
It does. He insists on paying the full price, 400 shekels of silver, which was apparently the standard fair market value. They initially offer it maybe cheaper or even as a gift.
But he refuses.
He refuses the shortcut. The material emphasizes this. Abraham is willing to invest significantly in the promise God gave him, even for this seemingly small piece of land. It's a burial plot, but it represents something bigger.
That's a powerful leadership principle right there, isn't it? Faith isn't passive.
Not at all. Whether it's spiritual faith or faith in a business vision or a future you're building, it often demands a price.
Time, effort, resources, sacrifice.
Exactly. You have to put some skin in the game. Stepping into what's ahead usually means investing something valuable now. That investment is an act of leadership. It shows commitment.
Absolutely. It's tangible. And the material links this to James chapter 2, verse 17.
James chapter 2, verse 17. It's very direct.
Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Abraham's purchase is like exhibit A for that principle. Faith and action have to work together.
They're intertwined. So Abraham makes this purchase, this investment. What's the deeper meaning here, according to the material?
Well, Genesis chapter 23, verse 17 through verse 20 describes the deal being finalized. Abraham takes legal possession.
Genesis chapter 23, verse 17 through verse 20.
And the absolutely key insight from the material is this. That cave, Machpelah, was the very first piece of the promised land that Abraham's family legally owned.
Wow. After all that time, all the promises, the first tangible stake in the ground is a burial cave.
And think about the timeline. The material points this out, and it's kind of staggering. It had been about 62 years since God first made that huge promise of land to Abraham.
62 years. He was 75 then.
Right, and now he's 137. Sarah died at 127. So over 6 decades of waiting, living as a stranger, not seeing the big promise fulfilled.
Yet his faith was strong enough to make this costly investment in that specific land.
That combination, the long wait, then the decisive, expensive action, it says so much about his leadership, his conviction.
And the material clarifies this purchase wasn't just about Sarah's burial. It was a foundational act, a step towards future generations actually inheriting the whole land.
That really shifts the perspective. It's about legacy.
Exactly. And it connects to how we think about leadership in life today. Sometimes the big decisions, the investments we make, our time, our money, our energy, maybe difficult choices that aren't just for us right now.
They're laying groundwork.
Yeah. For those coming after us, creating an inheritance that's more than just, stuff.
And there's another scripture the material brings in here, Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22.
Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22.
It reads, "A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children." It broadens that idea of long-term impact, doesn't it? Our actions ripple outwards.
Definitely. So let's try to pull these threads together. What are the key takeaways the material offers for us, for you listening today, both in leadership and just, live?
Okay, first, leadership and life requires letting go sometimes. Honoring the past, yes, but recognizing some things just don't belong in the future you're building.
You can't carry everything forward. Second, faith needs investment. Real growth, spiritual, relational, professional, usually costs something. You can't expect progress without paying a price.
No shortcuts, like Abraham showed.
Right. And third, every step taken in faith, even if it feels small or prompted by a crisis, like buying a burial plot, it contributes to something bigger down the road.
Abraham's investment secured a piece of the future inheritance, even though he wouldn't see the whole thing himself.
That forward look, that persistent faith, is captured in another passage the material points to, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9 through verse 10.
Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9 through verse 10. Speaking about Abraham again.
It says, By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God.
Wow. Living like a stranger, but looking forward to God's ultimate plan. That's powerful imagery.
It really is.
And it leaves us with, I think, a really provocative thought to consider as we wrap up this deep dive based purely on the material we've explored. Think again about that 62-year gap the material highlighted. 62 years between God's massive promise of land and Abraham making that first tangible, costly investment in it.
Yeah, that's a long time to hold on.
So what is that huge wait combined with the eventual decisive action paying the full price? What does that combination suggest to you about patience, about faith, maybe divine timing, and about what active intentional leadership looks like when you're pursuing really long-term goals or promises in your own life?
That's a lot to chew on. Patience, faith, timing, action. It's all in there.
Absolutely. So as we close this deep dive, the core message that seems to echo from this material is, well, it's challenging but simple. Even in those tough seasons, transition, loss, stepping into the unknown, real faith demands action. It requires trusting in the future you're called to.
And the material ends on a hopeful note, doesn't it? That every ending, if you navigate it with faith and that kind of decisive action, it really can be a new beginning. Whether you're leading through grief, making a bold investment, or just stepping onto new ground, this story reminds us there are principles, maybe divine principles, guiding the way forward.
We really hope this exploration of Abraham's story through the lens of this material has given you some valuable insights, some things to think about for your own leadership, your own life, whatever transitions you might be navigating right now.
Thank you for joining us on the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast. I hope today's insights have encouraged and equipped you to lead with faith, wisdom, and purpose. Remember, the greatest leader of all time taught us that true leadership is about serving others. If you enjoyed this episode and podcast, be sure to subscribe, share it with others, and leave a review. It helps us reach more people with these transformative truths. Until next time, keep leading with grace and walking in purpose.